If you are watching this video, then we have piqued your curiosity. True crime, man's dark imagination. And now, here is your host, Alan Gautreaux.
The scene of a gruesome crime. A married woman cavorting with a married man known for his playboy lifestyle and political connections. A sense of jealousy permeated their relationship. And one night in October 1931, an emotional explosion left 2 women dead and another on the run. Did Winnie Ruth Judd commit an act of self-preservation in murdering 2 women she once called friends? Or did her boyfriend commit the murders and then she, out of an act of love, take the fall? On October 19, 1931, George Booker, a baggage checker for a railroad line, stood in the Los Angeles Union Station. Around him, folks rushed to their trains, got to the baggage area, or welcomed loved ones and friends on the platform. Booker had been at work all morning, loading and unloading luggage, and rarely noticed the activity going on around him. He noticed 2 trunks that had not been retrieved by their owner, as the Golden State Limited had arrived earlier. The 2 trunks, as Booker described them, they were black with great silver latch-type locks. One was a larger trunk, 40 inches by 24 by 38, and had weighed in at about 235 pounds. The other was an average-size steam trunk, 15 inches by 18 inches by 36, weighing some 50 pounds less. Booker was given the duty of checking any luggage coming into the station for bootleg liquor or Tommy guns, which may have been smuggled into the city through that mode of transportation. After all, it was Prohibition, where a new class of criminal emerged as a result of making alcohol illegal 12 years before. In addition to checking the baggage, Southern Pacific gave Booker the assignment to open luggage he viewed as suspect. With the 2 trunks sitting before him, the porter noticed that he smelled a nauseating odor from both of the black trunks. Booker realized that hunters returning from some of their hunting sojourns stored their kills in trunks until they returned from trips in the mountains, smuggling those dead animals, whether they be deer or bear meat, through the railway stations. But Booker noticed that a very dark liquid began dripping from the 2 trunks from the corners of the luggage. Just as Booker noticed the liquid dripping from the trunks, he noticed a Ford Roadster angling to back up to the loading dock in order to retrieve those 2 trunks. Inside of the vehicle, Booker noticed a blonde-haired woman who resembled the movie star Norma Shearer, and a young college-aged male who appeared to have been younger than the woman. The woman exited the car and then walked up to Booker with some claim tickets in her hand. When Booker told his supervisor, Jim Anderson, of his concerns regarding the 2 trunks, he spotted the blonde woman and the young man climbing the stairs to the platform. Anderson walked out of his office and approached the couple, where he asked the young lady, "Have to ask you, ma'am, what are the contents?" The woman answered that they were just personal articles. The woman appeared a little shaken, and her face appeared to have been slightly bruised. The young woman then confirmed Anderson's question and apologized for being late, as she had to wait for her brother, the college-aged male, to pick her up before coming to the train station. Anderson acknowledged the answer, but then queried regarding the stench coming from the trunks. The young woman acted surprised, and the young man leaned over and mentioned to the young woman that there did seem to be a smell coming from the trunks. The young man also pointed out a liquid oozing from the corners as well. Even when Anderson and the young man detected the smell, the young woman feigned any detection of that smell. When viewing the liquid oozing from the corners of the trunks, The young woman stated that she could not, for the life of her, know what the liquid could be. Anderson then, after entertaining the young woman's nonchalance, stated that he would have to open the trunks for inspection. The young woman then fumbled around in her purse, supposedly looking for the keys to the trunks. Anderson noticed that the young woman's other hand was bandaged. When the young woman stated that her husband must have the keys, Anderson treated her reaction as a mistruth. When Anderson offered for the young woman to use his phone, she refused the offer and then dragged her young companion down the steps to the vehicle, appearing to hastily get away from the platform. The young male companion seemed equally confused at his sister's behavior. Anderson, already suspicious, telephoned the Los Angeles Police Department, where Lieutenant Frank Ryan answered the telephone. After listening to Anderson's suspicions, the detective made his way to the station and, after observing the trunks, picked one of the locks open. When he viewed the larger trunk before opening it, his training and experience denoted something just not quite right about these trunks, especially when the putrid smell from the luggage permeated his nostrils. Lieutenant Ryan expected the worst. Lieutenant Ryan carefully unlocked the lid from one of the trunks and slowly lifted the lid. The overwhelming stench slammed him right in the face. Once he opened the lid, the lawman saw a layer of rags that sat on top, but the detective knew something else awaited his discovery. When he lifted the rags, the face of a woman's decomposing face stared back at him. Lieutenant Ryan immediately slammed the lid down and backed away. Holy shit! Just then, a locomotive could be heard in the background. Once Lieutenant Ryan regained his composure, he determined to examine both of the trunks. A newspaper article appeared the next day which exposed what Lieutenant Ryan had uncovered. In the larger one was the body of an older and larger woman. She had been shoved into the trunk and partly hidden by a mass of clothing, blankets, letters, and a jumble of other material, apparently thrown hastily on top of the corpse. In the body of the other woman in the other trunk were 3 bullet wounds. One was through the left temple, one in the left breast, and one in the left shoulder. She had been stuffed into the smaller trunk, for the body had been severed by a keen-edged instrument, cut into 3 pieces, but the portion from the waist to the knees was missing. Both women appeared to have been dead for at least 2 days by the time of their discovery. The missing pieces of the younger woman were soon discovered when the janitor for the ladies' restroom at the station discovered a beige valise and hat box that had been hidden behind the door to the ladies' room. When the items, including the trunks, had been brought to the city morgue, they noted that the young woman's torso had been located within the valise. The torso, dressed in pink pajamas, had been bundled in blankets. Within the hat box, investigators discovered a surgeon's instrument kit, mostly surgical implements used in dissection. Additionally, authorities found a Colt .25 caliber pistol, a box of Winchester cartridges for the pistol, a bread knife, and various women's cosmetics. Almost immediately, the police identified the owner of the luggage as Winnie Ruth Judd. Winnie was the daughter of Reverend and Mrs. McKinnell from Darlington, Indiana. Winnie was married to Dr. William C. Judd, whom, by 1931, Winnie, who was 26 at the time, had been married to Dr. Judd for 7 years. Dr. Judd had a dark secret, though: substance abuse, and his practice suffered as a result of the addiction. During World War I, he received a serious wound which saw him become addicted to morphine. Needless to say, Winnie became disappointed with the marriage and also exhibited signs that she may stray. Moreover, Dr. Judd was 22 years older than his wife, and she considered herself too young to still be tied down, especially with a drug-addicted husband who let his business fail as a result of that addiction. When the couple first got married, Winnie became pregnant, twice, miscarrying both times. Later, she contracted a lesser form of tuberculosis, and Dr. Judd placed her within a sanatorium. She longed to rejoin her husband after following him to Mexico. Dr. Judd dedicated himself, despite his addiction, to helping the poor, and once she gained her release from the sanatorium, she tried to rejoin her husband in Mexico several times, but Winnie's health kept her from going. So, the medical practice could not support a young bride with such a fragile immune system. After rejoining him, Winnie decided she would return to the U.S. while her husband stayed in Mexico. They still remained in contact, but Winnie decided she needed more than compassionate and loving words on paper. In 1930, Winnie moved to Phoenix, Arizona, known for its medicinal properties when it came to a climate that helped the breathing difficulties of those afflicted with tuberculosis. When she arrived in Phoenix, Winnie cut her hair to the bob cut popular of the day and eventually fell in love with a younger man, younger than her husband, who smiled constantly and was described as debonair and bedroom-eyed, a man named Jack Halloran. Winnie met Halloran when she took a job as a governess for the Lee Ford family. Halloran, who lived next door, was merely a benefit from the employment. Halloran was 44 years old and very politically connected, and obviously held a strong attraction for the young girl, which was wholly different from what Winnie was used to with her much older husband. At the time of Winnie Judd and Jack Halloran's affair, Phoenix stood as a city in the desert that struggled to break into the 20th century. Although there existed some modern conveniences, the city in the desert was still considered somewhat of a Wild West outpost, reminiscent of the raucous towns of the later 19th century. It still had outlaws, although they wore pinstripe suits and exhibited traits of being confidence tricksters rather than a six-shooter on their hip. Halloran had been characterized as one of these individuals. Although everyone knew Halloran and his charisma and political acumen, he had a wife and 3 children. Discretion became the call of the day for his affair with Winnie. Although Winnie continued to write her husband, she still exhibited the freedom of a single woman with her affair with Halloran. The affair soon became a well-publicized secret. Even receiving attention from the male strangers brought a sense of overwhelming self-esteem for the young woman. Winnie decided after a few months that she needed more money, so she left the governess job and began working as a medical secretary. The raise in salary allowed much freedom than she'd ever experienced before, and also allowed her to rent a small cottage for herself. The new employment allowed Winnie to send money to her husband, who left Mexico soon thereafter to check himself into an addiction hospital in California for some sort of cure. As part of the young and free sect within the city of Phoenix, Winnie made friends very easily. 2 friends in particular, Anne Leroy, a 32-year-old Oregonian divorcee who worked as an X-ray technician, and 24-year-old Hedvig Sammy Samuelson, also suffering from tuberculosis, who decided to move to Arizona to take a break from her teaching career and seek a cure for her malady. Before moving to Arizona, Leroy and Samuelson worked in Alaska, where they became colleagues and then friends. Then they decided to move further south in the U.S. because of the climate and because of Samuelson's condition. When the 2 women, Leroy and Samuelson, started palling around together, most people thought that because of Leroy's manliness, the 2 were what was known at the time as queer love or lesbians. The term at the time was very derogatory due to the unacceptability of homosexuality in any form. However, all indications never appeared to signify that type of relationship. In fact, both women expressed a certain taste in men. Even they knew about the relationship between Winnie and Halloran, calling the married suitor Happy Jack. The 3 women lived in a duplex located at 2929 North 2nd Street, a short trolley ride away from Winnie's other residence. Oftentimes, Leroy and Hedvig held small parties at the apartment and invited not only Winnie and Halloran, but also business associates of Halloran's, making the party more jovial. Halloran also brought alcohol, as both he and his fellow male revelers partied into the night as their wives believed they attended late-night business meetings. One of the things, if any, that bothered Winnie was that Halloran, on occasion, visited the 2 girls without Winnie accompanying him. Of course, Winnie's 2 friends held certain attributes that Halloran found endearing. In fact, most heterosexual men would find the girls' looks very attractive. Leroy was tall, with chiseled features and an attractive figure, and Samuelson was a cute blonde. In the autumn of 1931, The three girls attempted to live together for a time at 2929 North 2nd Street. But soon the women started to notice each other's imperfections and began arguing incessantly. Winnie seemed to be somewhat sloppy, while the other two were obsessively neat. After this rift, Winnie returned to her former residence. The disagreements possibly went further than first believed. Leroy and Samuelson had remained close since their moving from the Great White North. Winnie had been seen as an outsider regarding the two when she left her residence and decided to give the two women their freedom to live the way they desired. Starting on the evening of October 15, 1931, Winnie learned that Halloran planned a deer hunting trip to the White Mountains of northern Arizona. Winnie wanted to introduce Halloran to a pretty young nurse, Lucille Moore, who was from that area to guide the hunting party. On the way back from picking up the guide, the three of them, including Winnie, headed back to Winnie's residence where she had dinner in the oven. Just then, after riding in the car for a few minutes, Halloran mentioned that he promised Leroy and Samuelson that he would pass by their residence that evening to visit with some of his friends. Earlier that day, Winnie turned down a dinner invitation from Leroy, stating that she had business to attend to that evening. Suppositions as to Winnie's behavior that night are lost to history, but some historians believe that the other girls stood to get jealous if Halloran appeared with another pretty female. Other historians have hypothesized that Winnie was sharing Halloran's bed with Leroy and Samuelson as well. When Halloran, Winnie, and Moore arrived at the two girls' residence, Winnie and Moore waited in the vehicle as Halloran walked up to the door and entered the house. When Halloran exited the residence, Leroy and Samuelson followed, walking up to the car to extend their greetings to Winnie and Moore. Winnie turned down a second invitation to dinner, remembering the morsels that remained in her oven for their return. The following day, Winnie realized that her suspicions rang true. Leroy and Samuelson turned. They did not like the presence of Lucille Moore at all. On that Friday evening, October 16, 1931, Winnie arrived home from work at approximately 6:30 p.m. She fed the cat and waited impatiently for Halloran to arrive and then take her to dinner. Winnie waited until approximately 9 p.m. when she realized, as he had done so many times before, Halloran stood her up. She became furious and took the trolley over to the Leroy and Samuelson residence. When Winnie arrived, she had hoped that the two were playing bridge with an additional guest, but by the time she got there, the guest left and two women asked if Winnie would spend the night. The trolley stopped running and she had no other way to get back to her residence. As the three women prepared for bed, they heated up some milk and began talking before settling down for the night. All at once, an argument began when Leroy berated Winnie for setting up the meeting between Halloran and Lucille Moore. Leroy claimed that Moore was being treated for syphilis, and by means of introducing Moore to Halloran, she placed the man's life in danger. Winnie stood her ground and stated that she did not believe that Halloran would be attracted to Moore, and the information about her affliction should remain confidential. At this point in the argument, the name-calling commenced and even escalated, and Samuelson took sides with her roommate, Leroy. Both Leroy and Samuelson intimated that Winnie's husband would welcome the information that Winnie has portrayed herself as a slut, and Dr. Judd would probably be thankful for the information that his wife acted in such a promiscuous manner. Winnie responded that everyone around the three women believed that Leroy and Samuelson were lesbians. Leroy then countered by exclaiming that she would tell Halloran that Moore had a venereal disease. Winnie also inferred that Leroy broke a very expensive piece of equipment at her place of employment on purpose. At approximately 10:25 that evening, Winnie left the bedroom and brought the glass of milk to the sink. According to Winnie, at that instant, she heard a grunt behind her, and when she turned to investigate the noise, stated that Samuelson stood there holding a loaded firearm and pressed the barrel to Winnie's chest. A struggle then ensued between the two women, and at the same time, Winnie grabbed a bread knife from the kitchen counter. Winnie stabbed Samuelson across the shoulder in self-defense, stunning both of them. As the struggle continued, the weapon discharged and struck Winnie in the left hand. She continued to grapple with Samuelson and subsequently fell to the floor. The weapon discharged again, striking Samuelson in the left shoulder. The struggle finally ended when the weapon discharged again, striking Samuelson in the chest. It was then, and only then, that Samuelson released her grip from the firearm. As the two continued to struggle on the kitchen floor, Leroy entered the kitchen and struck Winnie over the head with a small ironing board. Leroy kept screaming to Samuelson, "Shoot! Shoot her!" Samuelson, mortally wounded, laid on the floor as Leroy continued to strike Winnie over the head with the ironing board. As the pummeled woman gained control to stand up, she held the weapon in her hand and it discharged once more with the shot going wild. Winnie had firm possession of the firearm and Leroy continued to pummel her with the ironing board. The beaten woman saw no other choice but to fire the weapon again, on purpose, at Leroy. Later, Winnie admitted that she was not quite sure how many times she shot Leroy, and, exhausted, Winnie fell to the floor. Flanked by two dead bodies when she finally regained composure, Winnie put on a dress and her shoes and caught the final trolley back to her residence. Since the trolley line closed about halfway back to her house, Winnie had to walk several blocks before she got home. When Winnie finally arrived home at approximately 11:30 p.m., she found Halloran already there, inebriated. At first, she wanted to call her husband, but Halloran talked her out of it. Trying to sober Halloran as soon as possible, Winnie forced him to drive her back to the girl's residence, but suggested that he park the car a short walk away instead of in front of the house. Winnie and Halloran entered the residence through the front door and made their way to the kitchen. Halloran, without saying a word, picked up Samuelson's body and brought it to her bedroom, literally throwing the corpse onto the bed. When the body hit the mattress, blood spattered from the victim's hair all over the mattress and the wall above the headboard. Winnie started to clean up the blood from the kitchen floor and then had to stop when she realized the enormity of what she had done to two women that she once considered her best friends. She began shaking, and Halloran took over to clean the rest of the kitchen. Winnie suggested to her lover that she turn herself in to the police and then to the state's attorney. Halloran talked her out of the suggestion and stated that he would take care of the situation on his own. Halloran then suggested he call a Dr. Brown, a friend of his, to tend to her wound, and that the medical man would also be a willing accomplice as Halloran had enough on the doctor to see him hang. Attempts to reach the doctor failed, and Halloran mentioned it no more. When Halloran finished cleaning the kitchen, he went to the garage of the house and found a large steamer trunk that he carried back into the house. Winnie's lover suggested that he drive her home and then come back to the girl's house to complete the job. Halloran planned to stuff two dead bodies into the trunk and then bury it in the desert. As the two left the residence, Winnie placed the .25 caliber firearm in her purse. 10 minutes after leaving the crime scene, she was home. Halloran having dropped her off, the rest of the evening, Winnie wondered what Halloran was up to regarding the cleaning up of the crime scene. Early the next morning, Winnie called work and asked if she could take the day off. Her employers would not relent, so she went to work that day even though she experienced immense pain in her wounded hand and anxiety as not having heard from her lover all that day. Later that evening, Halloran finally called Winnie and asked her to meet him at the crime scene. When she arrived at the residence, Winnie noticed that the trunk still sat in the front room of the house. A sinking feeling went through her body as she spotted the large trunk because she had hoped to see it gone by the time she arrived there. Halloran then explained that to place the bodies in the desert, Winnie and he would risk high exposure to being apprehended. The highway patrol constantly and consistently patrolled the areas, and if and when the trunk had been discovered, Winnie would be implicated immediately. Halloran offered another plan. Winnie take the trunks to Los Angeles, California, as far away from Arizona as possible. Halloran stated there would be a man to meet Winnie there that would assist with the body disposal. Moreover, the trip to California would provide Winnie with an alibi for the crime. Also, she had a brother there attending college and she wanted to see him. At that present time, Dr. Judd resided in Los Angeles and gave Winnie another reason to establish an alibi. When Winnie asked how Halloran managed to stuff the bodies into the trunk, he responded that he placed Leroy into the bottom of the trunk. When it came time to place Samuelson into the trunk, there was not enough room. So Halloran stated to Winnie that he had to operate on Samuelson to fit her into the trunk without arousing much suspicion. Winnie became very nauseated at the thought, but then relaxed as she realized this was the only way to secret the bodies. Halloran then left to go to the train station and purchase a ticket for his girlfriend. When he returned to the crime scene, Halloran informed Winnie that the ticket would be waiting for her and that she was to call a delivery service that would pick the trunk up and deliver it to the station, where it would be transported on the same train she would board that day. After these instructions and the promise that he would stay in touch with her, Halloran just disappeared and went on to act as if Winnie never existed. When the delivery service showed up to pick up the trunk, they informed Winnie that the trunk was far too heavy and that whatever the contents, she must split them up in order to ship them. With no choice but to divide the body parts of the victims on her own, Winnie found a smaller trunk with which to move the parts. Finding an easier way to load the parts into another trunk, Winnie just tilted the first trunk and pushed the parts into the smaller container. On the morning of October 18th, in preparing for the trip to Los Angeles, Winnie sought the help of her landlord and his son to help the delivery service to load the trunks onto the delivery truck and make sure she got to the station on time for her journey to California. At 6:30 p.m., Winnie made it to the train station. When the trunks arrived at the train station, the large trunk weighed in at 175 pounds. Winnie began to panic, but when the attendant informed her that she would only have to pay $4.50 for the extra weight, a sense of relief came over her that she actually got away with the murders. After a 12-hour trip to Los Angeles, Winnie arrived at the station in the evening. The man that Halloran said would meet her there failed to show up. When Winnie telephoned Halloran back in Phoenix, the housekeeper stated that he went hunting and remained unavailable for quite some time. Therefore, Winnie had to deal with the Los Angeles Police Department when the contents had been discovered through the snooping of Detective Lieutenant Ryan. After hearing that the trunks had been opened, Winnie went on the run. All over the nation, observers could not understand how a woman with such a beautiful face could have been the ultimate femme fatale. The media seemed starved for any information regarding Winnie, including her dress size, her struggle with tuberculosis, favorite foods, family's first names, marital history, and even the name of her paramour. In those days, any suspicion of being an adulterer held more weight than the murders themselves, according to the media. Rewards for her capture or for her whereabouts appeared in papers all over the nation. The authorities searched and then discovered Winnie's brother and Halloran, questioning them both about the events. Both had an alibi and neither admitted knowing about the crimes. Although Winnie's brother, Burton McKinnell, accompanied his sister to the train station, he disavowed any knowledge of the crimes. McKinnell related that when he drove Winnie around Los Angeles at lunchtime, he knew something was amiss and decided to ask her, "Ruth, what's in the trunk, a man or a woman?" Winnie stated that she would not answer those questions and that she could justify everything. McKinnell stated that his sister asked him for money because she had to go away. Just then, he let his sister out along the side of the road, and that was the last time he saw her. Finally, on October 23, 1931, authorities located Winnie hiding out, of all places, in a funeral parlor. Having not eaten, bathed, or rested, Winnie went with the police without a struggle. Several newspapermen were present when the LAPD brought her to the local station. Winnie turned to the newsmen and kept repeating, "I had to do it. I had to." Because of the discovery of the way the victims had been packaged, no one expected Winnie to make a claim of self-defense, and this shocked everyone when she finally raised that defense. When readers saw the photos of what they envisioned as a cold-blooded killer based upon the most recent reports, they learned that this monster was a demure young lady who may have just defended her person. From then on, it seemed that the public displayed massive sympathy for the accused double murderer. But in Phoenix, the compassionate atmosphere did not influence those who believed her to be a psychopath just trying to escape justice. When the media made known that one of the mattresses appeared missing from the residence, this shocked Winnie. She remembered that when she last saw the bedrooms in the house, each bedroom had their mattresses intact. Detectives on the case believed that the mattress may have been saturated with blood to further incriminate the accused. With the walls of the residence spattered with blood, authorities believed that the mattresses could not have escaped such a bloodbath. Winnie believed that Halloran moved the mattresses when he cleaned the crime scene. Winnie's protestations fell on deaf ears. To further implicate the accused with the horrendous acts, local authorities withheld information when it came to documenting the autopsy reports. Had they been transparent, the public would come to the realization that the dissection of Samuelson's body had been cut to pieces by someone who had experience with illegal body disposal. Authorities also claimed to have discovered a letter written by Samuelson that related to her sister that Winnie and Leroy constantly fought during the former's occupancy. And with Winnie gone, things calmed down within the residence. During an extended interrogation, Winnie stated to authorities that on the night of the murders, Samuelson was the aggressor, brandishing a .25 caliber pistol when the firearm discharged and a round entered Winnie's left hand. Also, the suspect spoke of Leroy attacking her with the ironing board. Winnie held some bruises from the attack, and had those been documented properly, her defense from attack would have appeared more viable. However, when police first arrested Winnie, medical personnel performed emergency surgery on her hand to remove the bullet. Unfortunately, the hand turned gangrenous, but Dr. Grace Holman noted several welts, cuts, and bruises, 147 of them all over her body. These wounds were what could be characterized as defensive wounds from an attack. The physician documenting the injuries noted, "Mrs. Judd put up a tremendous fight for her life." Photographs taken of her injuries and the diagnosis mysteriously vanished from the investigative file. Authorities subsequently called Winnie a liar and firmly believed that she shot herself in order to bring sympathy and justify a fight the night of the murders. Investigators stated that no one saw Winnie the day after the alleged murders with a bandage around her hand. Subsequent to the disbelief that Winnie sustained a wound and her whole claim was disingenuous, authorities actually withheld that 5 witnesses averred that she did, in fact, have a bandage around her wounded hand. In attempting to manipulate the narrative surrounding the suspect's rendition of events, authorities forwarded that Winnie acted like a sociopath when she murdered the 2 women in their sleep, mutilated the bodies, packed them into trunks, then slept soundly before shipping the bodies to Los Angeles. Some speculated at the time that the Phoenix Police Department may have been covering for Jack Halloran all the time. This may be evidence that even when Halloran's name surfaced as perhaps having something to do with the cover-up, every newspaper throughout the country mentioned his name, except those in Phoenix. The Phoenix Gazette mentioned him only as Mr. X. Through several witnesses, Halloran's car had been witnessed in the neighborhood where the girls resided on the Friday and Saturday night of the murders. Even after the authorities checked the license plate numbers they received, identified Halloran's car as the one in the neighborhood that night. Newspapers around the country produced the story, but local media simply ignored it. These findings would not be included within the prosecution's court filings. Another consideration that surfaced was a diary in the handwriting of Anne Leroy that named several influential people in the Phoenix area that visited the girls for their parties. The diary allegedly contained intimate details that the girls had and their relationships with these men. With this evidence in hand, the state attorney had to admit it into the record, but refused to make any comments regarding the incriminating matter within the diary. Rumors spread that the prominent and influential of Phoenix were contained within the handwritten work, casting aspersions on the good moral character of the men whose names appeared within the diary. The local population suspected the truth and learned a great deal regarding these influential men known as summer bachelors. This moniker was bestowed upon those married men with children who sent their wives and children away for the month of June every year so that they could attend parties and court mistresses. Some of the women hoped that they would receive expensive gifts or a job promotion if they were willing to succumb to the desires of these influential men. This diary may prove explosive for Phoenix, so it was never actively included in the prosecution's evidence at trial. Though many condemned Winnie for the murders, and it seemed as though the prosecution had a slam dunk, so to speak, one person stepped forward and questioned the evidence. Phoenix Sheriff John R. McFadden viewed the Samuelson autopsy photos and determined that Winnie could not have cut up the body. It had to have been done by someone with anatomical knowledge. Winnie mentioned that Halloran told her that Samuelson had been operated on. Another aspect of the autopsy photos convinced Sheriff McFadden that Halloran could not have dismembered the body either, since neither Halloran nor Winnie were capable of doing this type of dissection. Sheriff McFadden mentioned Dr. Charles Brown, Halloran's friend, whom Halloran finally contacted the night of the murder. Together, according to Sheriff McFadden, the two men dismembered Samuelson's body and then placed them within the trunk. Sheriff McFadden conducted his investigation independently of the local authorities and received death threats for his stance based upon the evidence. Along with McFadden, a later detective named Hugh Ennis shared McFadden's doubts about the way authorities conducted the Judd investigation. But Ennis would not join the force until later, but steadfastly agreed that the Phoenix Police Department at the time of the investigation was ripe with political machinations, and stated that the department he joined, where he would later flourish as a detective in the homicide, vice, and narcotics divisions, was highly professional and held no political loyalties. Of course, Ennis's assessment of the Judd case came much later after an exhaustive review of the case file and the evidence. Ennis reached the rank of captain and studied every aspect of the case for years, reaching the conclusion that the police were definitely politically guided and motivated throughout the Judd case. With Ennis's evaluation, he stated 4 areas existed where police misconduct took a bearing on the case. Firstly, police allowed reporters to contaminate the crime scene when the investigation began. Ennis stated any crime scene integrity was gone. Who knows what evidence was destroyed as those people were milling around. Additionally, the court blood expert did not arrive to take any samples from the scene until 28 days after the murders occurred. This also occurred after the landlord to the property opened the crime scene after police left and charged admission to any curiosity seekers. After that, according to Ennis, blood sampling meant nothing. Thirdly, Ennis expressed doubts that Winnie Judd shot the victims while they slept. He contended that not enough blood existed at the scene to justify such a conclusion. And, fourth, something must have existed on the mattresses that did not fit the state's case. The mattresses, according to Ennis, could have proven a very significant portion of the defense's case. Ennis asked the question, why would Winnie dispose of the mattresses if they had blood on them, when so much blood seemed to cover the walls? Ennis also questioned the premeditation with which the prosecution alleged Winnie committed the crimes. In order to meet this burden of proof, the prosecution would have to prove that Winnie came over to the girl's apartment with the gun in her purse. The prosecution failed to prove premeditation because they could establish a chain of custody as to when the weapon entered the equation. Ennis concluded that Winnie didn't even have a plan prior to the murders. Therefore, how could the crimes be premeditated? Winnie's trial began with jury selection on January 19, 1932, at the Maricopa County Courthouse in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. The state decided that they would charge Winnie for the murder of Anne Leroy, with a subsequent trial to try her for the murder of Sammy Samuelson. Winnie had 3 lawyers defending her, with the lead by well-known criminal attorney Paul Schenck. Observers noted that the defense was ineffective and a conviction appeared inevitable. As the prosecution presented the case to the jury, later opinions of the evidence varied as the jurors seemed confused as to the presentation of the prosecution's case. Moreover, everyone in the gallery and the jury expected Winnie to testify on her own behalf. Although the jury became aware of several pieces of evidence that the prosecution failed to produce at trial, on February 8, 1932, the jury reached the verdict of guilty and recommended that Winnie be hanged. Winnie Ruth Judd was placed on death row at the Arizona State Penitentiary, and over the next few months her case had been appealed, but the higher courts affirmed the judgment of the lower court and slated Winnie to die on February 17, 1933. Sheriff McFadden refused to accept the verdict and convinced Winnie to tell her side of the story, something that never occurred during the trial. With less than 2 months away from her scheduled execution, Sheriff McFadden brought several witnesses to the prison to listen to what Winnie had to say. McFadden did this in an effort to win a hearing where Minnie may receive a new trial. Sitting around the table were Winnie's new attorney, Oliver Wilson, William Delbridge, the prison warden, Jeff Adams, one of McFadden's deputies, and a court stenographer. With Winnie's statement, Sheriff McFadden's efforts to gain a grand jury hearing proved successful. As Winnie testified, it appeared that the jury believed every word coming from her mouth, as the statements she made could be traced to a certain source of truth. Whether McFadden threatened to arrest Jack Halloran, or whatever leverage he may have used, with the grand jury listening to the facts that Winnie related, that august body implored the parole board to reconsider Winnie's sentence, as they considered the murders to be manslaughter and not premeditated. The grand jury also issued an indictment against Jack Halloran, who could corroborate Winnie's story. When the parole board heard the results of the grand jury hearing, they postponed Winnie's execution until April 14, 1933, until such time as Halloran came forward to testify before the grand jury. Even though Winnie and McFadden cited their efforts as a victory, the testimony revealed by Winnie merely reduced the decision of the grand jury that she was merely highly emotional over an old lover and never required Halloran to testify. He walked out of the hearing after his lawyers lodged numerous objections, and Winnie's emotional breakdowns during the testimony sought to weaken her case for a new trial, or charging Halloran. He walked away without ever being involved in the case again. Winnie returned to her cell to await execution. Although it appeared as though Winnie ran out of options, the hearings did garner more support from the public. The new prison warden, A.G. Walker, firmly believed that Winnie grew insane from the whole ordeal and wanted an expedited insanity hearing. This could possibly save Winnie's life. This could, perhaps, mean a lifetime in an asylum rather than a short walk to a long rope. When the sanity hearing was granted, Winnie walked into the courthouse and exhibited signs of a psychological break. She laughed loudly, pointed to the panelists, and screamed they were gangsters. Winnie won her hearing and wound up living at the corner of Van Buren and 24th Streets, the Arizona State Mental Hospital, on April 24, 1933. Although her life may have been spared, the conditions of mental asylums at that period in history offered nothing more than degradation and discipline for minor infractions of the rules. Winnie accepted her fate and became the unofficial beautician for the institution, with many of the women patients coming to her with the hopes of making them presentable. Winnie became so good at her adopted vocation that even the nurses at the institution sought her out for makeup and hair tips. She became so well liked that people considered her as a member of the staff. As long as she stayed there, Winnie gained the respect of not only the other inmates, but also the staff. Some believed her to be perfectly sane and even forwarded the theory that her guilt may have been rushed through and someone made her the scapegoat. In fact, Halloran showed up to the dances sponsored by the institution just to sneer and laugh real nasty at her, and she'd go to pieces. But during her 3-decade-long incarceration, Winnie sought vacations from time to time. Between the period of her incarceration from 1933 to 1971, Winnie left for brief periods and returned after sojourns out in public. But one time, she remained gone for 7 years. In her last and 7th AWOL in 1962, she managed to reconnect with her brother, who financed her escape and supported her until she desired to get a job on her own. Winnie passed herself off as Marion Lane, a maidservant, and the Nichols family from San Francisco hired her to not only care for the family mansion, but also provided sitting services for the matriarch of the family, Mother Nichols. Although the court deemed Winnie insane in 1933, this did not vitiate the death penalty. In 1952, at a special hearing, the jurists granted Winnie's plea to consider the death penalty she received null and void. With this no longer hanging over her head, she next sought to gain a pardon. In 1969, with the assistance of attorney Melvin Belli, the renowned lawyer requested a hearing before the parole board and brought forth many witnesses who attested to Winnie's character. Belli proved erstwhile, but the parole board stood convinced that Winnie was still insane and denied her parole. But 2 years later, after enlisting the help of the public, on December 21, 1971, Arizona Governor Jack Williams signed the pardon for Winnie Ruth Judd. She walked out of the asylum a free woman. Jack Halloran never faced a jury for his part in disposing of evidence regarding the murders of Anne Leroy and Sammy Samuelson. The mysterious Dr. Brown also remained in the shadows as well. Winnie Ruth Judd returned to California under her assumed name, Marion Lane. She lived in Stockton, California with her canine friend Skeeter and passed away at age 93 in her sleep on October 23, 1998. Sheriff James McFadden, the man who saved Winnie from a certain death, retired from active duty as a lawman, seeing his career ended by political enemies. He stated he would do it all over again. Jack Halloran never saw the inside of a courtroom to defend his liberty for the rest of his life. But some Arizonans believed he was actually the murderer and forced Winnie to take the fall. Halloran suffered some retribution on his own when the company where he stood as a silent partner fired him and he disappeared into history. Because of her part in history, not many people actually knew the real Winnie Judd. Those that met her during her life stated that she expressed a sense of goodwill and compassion. So did she actually commit the crimes that investigators stated she perpetrated? Or did she become Halloran's scapegoat for the murders and dismemberments? Until next time. Hello everyone, this is Alan Gotro, your host of True Crime Man's Dark Imagination. If you would like to support our channel, you can become a member of Subscribestar. There are different levels, and subscribers get special privileges. Also, we do have a PayPal account. If you enjoy our work here, please think about subscribing. I will leave the links below in the comments section. We thank you very much for your viewing, and please stay tuned for future programs.